Welcome to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, February 20th. I'm your host, Hannah Lorenzo. Today on the show, multiple correction officers have been charged in the death of Robert Brooks. Advocates gathered earlier today at Governor Hochul's office to call for prison conditions to be improved.
Only reason that we here where we are today with these indictments is because it was caught on tape.
Cannabis sellers in New York City are being questioned over the safety of their products. This comes after a lawsuit in Massachusetts alleged packages were mislabeled with inflated THC percentages.
If they were to lie on their lab testing results and all that, they'd actually face real consequences, you would hope.
On the Upper East Side, a new exhibition is centralizing stories from 1920s Germany.
New objectivity was everything that a proud right-wing Germany wanted to suppress.
This and more, coming up.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The longest-serving Senate party leader in U.S. history, Kentucky U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, says he is retiring. The Republican's departure at the end of his term next year will cap 40 years in Congress. Today, on his 83rd birthday, McConnell paid tribute to his mother.
I've never lost sight of the fact that without my mother's devoted care, a childhood encounter with polio could have turned out a lot worse.
McConnell still walks with a limp and suffers health problems related to polio. His support for childhood vaccinations put him at odds with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s anti-vaccination advocacy. Earlier this month, McConnell was the sole Republican to join Senate Democrats in opposing Kennedy's confirmation as Health and Human Services Secretary. Kash Patel is the next director of the FBI. He was confirmed today, largely along a party line vote, but two Republicans, Maine's Susan Collins and Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, joined Democrats in voting no. New York Governor Kathy Hochul will not remove New York City Mayor Eric Adams from office, that according to multiple sources with knowledge of the governor's thinking. John Campbell of member station WNYC reports.
State and city law give the governor power to oust the mayor. But Governor Hochul doesn't intend on using that authority, at least not for now. Instead, she'll push bills to rein in the mayor's power and give the state more oversight. Hochul weighed Adams' fate in a series of meetings with city leaders this week. The Trump administration moved to dismiss federal corruption charges against the mayor earlier this month. That led a handful of prosecutors to quit. Two accused the mayor of cooperating with Trump's immigration crackdown in exchange for a dismissal, which the mayor denies. For NPR News, I'm John Campbell in Albany.
The Palestinian militant group Hamas returned the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages today in a ceremony run by mass militants in the south of Gaza. It's the first group of hostage bodies to be handed over under the ceasefire that went into effect January 19th. NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi reports Hamas had a defiant message for the United States.
Hamas gunmen stood on a stage with the 4 coffins of the Israeli hostages draped in black. Behind them, a poster of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as a fanged vampire. A masked militant from the Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military arm, spoke from the stage with a message directed at President Donald Trump. He called Trump's plan to displace Palestinians from Gaza and rebuild the Strip under U.S. ownership nonsense.
What do you think might frighten us? We've made very good friends with death lately, equally receiving and delivering it.
Hamas is expected to release 6 live hostages on Saturday. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Jericho.
From Washington, this is NPR News.
Columbia Radio News, I'm Madeline Riley. Governor Kathy Hochul will not remove Mayor Adams from the office this time, according to reports by the Associated Press and others. However, she will impose guidelines on his administration on City Hall. Earlier this week, the governor sought advice from a range of civic leaders on whether Mayor Adams should be dismissed, following the Justice Department's decision to drop his corruption case. New York Attorney General Letitia James announced today that the state will sue 9 flavored e-cigarette manufacturers. The lawsuit accuses the manufacturers of violating state laws and to prohibit the sales of these products that contain flavors that appeal to children. James brought a similar charges against e-cigarette manufacturer Juul 5 years ago, prompting the broader ban. Multiple New York corrections officers today were charged with the murder of 46-year-old inmate Robert Brooks in December of last year at the Mercy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. They are being arraigned this afternoon in Oneida County Court. More on that later. The New York Yankees announced today on a statement on X that Aaron Boone will continue as manager of the team for the next 2 years. Boone was originally signed through the 2025 season, but will stay with the Yankees until 2027, making it 8 years with the Yankees. The wintry weather continues in the city with a high of 32 and a low of 21 degrees. Light snow is expected this afternoon and into the evening.
Yesterday, President Trump declared himself king of New York City for canceling congestion pricing. The order came from the U.S. Transportation Secretary, Sean P. Duffy, but it is unclear if the cancellation is legal. I spoke with Justin Balick, a former director of the New York City Department of Transportation, who negotiated the 2019 agreement establishing the congestion pricing program, to break down whether or not Secretary Duffy has the authority to shut it down.
He is trying to revoke the value pricing pilot program agreement that the state of New York, the city of New York, and the MTA and the federal government all signed last year. And that is a program that was created by Congress, is longstanding, with the explicit purpose of providing states and localities with the authority to implement innovative tolling policies to relieve traffic congestion, which is exactly what congestion pricing is designed to do.
So I'm curious, what is the legality of all this? Like, do they really have any power to actually step in, even if it's not as much as they say they are?
So from our perspective and from talking with folks in the legal community, they do not have a lot to stand on when they're saying that they're going to unilaterally terminate this agreement.
And also related to the statement from yesterday, if you could also explain a bit further of your thoughts on the part of the statement where the secretary says they're terminating the pilot because the program was meant to impose tolls for congestion reduction rather than transit revenue generation.
It's important to go back and look at the law that established this program as part of the New York State budget in 2019. In state law, it is very clear that the program has twin goals of congestion relief and investment in mass transit. That's entirely appropriate, and it's already accomplishing the congestion relief that was the stated policy goal in state law, and as part of the value pricing program is what the state and the MTA and the city of New York are supposed to be working towards. We're already seeing those results.
I was curious about how this compared to when you were director of state legislation for the Department of Transportation in New York City, and you were also negotiating on the first U.S. congestion pricing program for New York. Are there changes in the ways that this is being approached, or just in the ways that the Trump administration has responded to it now?
It's mainly the latter. Right after the law was passed in 2019, we went to meet with the Trump officials during the first Trump term about the federal process that was needed, and I think it is telling and revealing that at the time, this was something that people regarded as a procedural matter that could happen after other parts of the federal discussion were dispensed with.
Okay, so Justin, I wanted to ask you, this looks like this might go to court. So what would happen if this does go to court after the MTA filed their statements?
So we heard the governor say yesterday that the MTA is already filing legal briefs to keep the program, and it's going to be up to the judge to, I think, review the record and look at the process that was followed to get this program up and running. And I know the MTA and the state of New York are confident about the rigorous process they followed and that this program does comport with what the value pricing pilot program is designed to do. So we are cautiously hopeful that it stands up in what are sure to be a series of court proceedings that kick off sooner versus later.
I just want to say thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with me today for our show, Uptown Radio.
All right, thank you so much. Take care.
Prison reform activist groups rallied outside Governor Kathy Hochul's office in Midtown this morning, advocating for incarcerated New Yorkers' rights. Some corrections officers were charged today with the murder of a 43-year-old incarcerated man. Activists say this kind of violence is nothing new and are calling for reform.
Outside a 47-story skyscraper in Midtown, on a below-freezing morning, 24 ralliers gather with signs shaped like gravestones and others with slogans like "Stop Killing Us." This building houses high-profile tenants like Bloomberg and Governor Kathy Hochul.
We're out here in this cold, cold weather to call on our legislatures and the governor to fire every last rogue officer. Yes.
Some of the officers involved in that death were indicted this afternoon on charges of murder. The incident occurred last month at Marcy Correctional Facility near Utica. Body cam footage shows correctional officers assaulting an incarcerated man named Robert Brooks. Stanley Bellamy is an organizer with the advocacy group Release Aging People in Prison. Why are you coming out here today? What is your message?
Only reason that we here where we are today with these indictments is because it was caught on tape.
Over 30,000 people are incarcerated in New York State, according to this month's government corrections data. This week, corrections officers across the state went on strike despite their union not authorizing it. Bellamy and other activists here today say their strike is meant to distract from Brooks's death.
One of our messages is that you complaining about the conditions that you actually created.
Bellamy was released from prison in June 2023 after serving nearly 4 decades in 6 different facilities. While incarcerated, Bellamy says he witnessed correctional officers regularly abusing their power.
It was an officer when I was in Attica in 1987, I think 88. One day he came to work and I said, "What's the matter with you? Why are you so distraught? What's going on?" He said, "I have to work in A block." And if you ever been in Attica, we called A block South Africa because the racism in that block was so terrible that he didn't want to work there because he said they told him, when you work in this block, this is how you have to treat the individuals in the block, and that wasn't his character.
Hochul granted Bellamy clemency from what was originally a 62.5-year to life sentence. But Bellamy wants to see more from her to fix the prison system at its roots. Yesterday, Hochul sent the National Guard to prisons where correctional officers have been striking. The ralliers aren't sure whether or not that's a good thing. Hannah Weaver, Columbia Radio News.
Earlier this week, American and Russian officials held their first peace negotiation talks since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, no Ukrainian officials were involved in the talks. Earlier this week, U.S. President Trump falsely called Ukraine President Zelensky a dictator. Dana Binfet took a trip to Little Ukraine in the Lower East Side to find out what residents think about the latest updates and what they hope to see.
Do you have thoughts on Trump calling Zelensky a dictator?
Well, I think his comment that Ukraine is responsible for the start of the war, I think it's outrageous.
Roman Bosnovich has lived in New York City for 60 years and has been coming to the East Village Meat Market for the past 20 years. Despite the cold weather in New York City this morning, he still showed up right when the deli opened at 9 a.m. When it comes to Trump, Bosnovich had a recent change of heart.
I've been a Trump supporter since about 2016, but I think I've been wearing his Make America hat for about 8 years or whatever, but today's the first day that I'm not wearing his hat until he decides to change his tone when dealing with Ukraine.
Bosnovich knows the story of Ukraine's formation very well.
Mr. Trump forgets that there was a Budapest memorandum where the territories of Ukraine was guaranteed and was to be respected. So the United States, if it has any credibility, it should abide by those agreements.
These negotiation talks come just ahead of the 3-year anniversary of the start of the war, and this local is concerned about the unprecedented approach to U.S. diplomacy, especially excluding Ukraine from the conversations.
Sooner or later, Ukraine has to be part of the conversation. Trump can have a conversation with Putin whenever he wants to, but that's sooner or later Zelensky has to be represented and Ukrainian interests have to be represented.
The neighborhood is bright with yellow and blue flags hanging from apartment balconies and peeking out of corner store windows up and down 2nd Avenue. From yellow and blue cookies in the deli, flags in the coffee shops, and Stand With Ukraine stamps on the sidewalk outside Veselka, the neighborhood is awash in support for Ukraine.
Veselka is a very popular Ukrainian restaurant in the East Village, been around at least 70 years, I want to say, and I've worked across the street for 5 years.
John Kennedy Daly is a barista at the Mud Spot and has worked in Little Ukraine since 2020, 2 years before the war in Ukraine began. He says there have been way more flags since the war started, and the neighborhood has continued to be busy, attributing it to local support for Ukraine.
I support Ukraine because those are the people that are around me in this neighborhood. Veselka specifically has had a line around the block. Even now, years on, they still have lines going around the block, which they didn't necessarily have a few years ago coming out of COVID.
Residents in this Lower East Side neighborhood are waiting to see what comes of the negotiation talks and the war in Ukraine. Dana Binfet, Uptown Radio News.
Twice. I left being that I had the opportunity to tour with Fetty Wap at the peak of his career.
Columbia University door attendant and former musician Barry Battle.
After a certain amount of time, I just felt like I've reached a point of my career where I could step away from it. I've inspired so many others, and I wanted to just do something more with life. So my education was number one on that list. So I decided that I wanted to go back to school, but not only to like any other school. I wanted to pursue a degree from an Ivy League, and the smartest way for me to do so would be to build my relationship with Columbia, to be specific. So I got this job here, left my music career. I just submitted my application for Columbia on January 15th.
You're listening to Uptown Radio, Thursdays at 4.
Joe Willis.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm host Hannah Lorenzo. Next up, a poultry predicament. The outbreak of bird flu has forced some farmers to buy eggs from neighboring farms in order to keep their customer base satisfied. After that, we hear from a local bird watcher who finally sighted the elusive long-eared owl. Later, New York City cannabis markets are called into question after lawsuits in Massachusetts allege inaccurate THC percentages on packages. These stories and more coming up. eggs are a regular staple in your grocery shopping, you've probably been paying attention to how high the costs have been lately. Farmers have lost their livestock due to the outbreak of the bird flu, which has affected the supply chain. Madeline Riley reports on how this disruption has forced them to purchase inventory from neighboring farms to satisfy their customer base.
Joe Willis owns Willis Poultry Farms in Syracuse. He's in the egg business. Lately, that's been tough. Over 20 million birds have been lost to H1N1.
Let's say I would lose all my chickens, and I've got accounts I've had for 40 years.
Willis says he wants to hold on to his customers for later when his farm has recuperated, which turns him into a customer.
So I go to the next closest farm, and he goes, "Joe, terrible luck. Take all the spares I got." And I go and I cover my customers.
But Willis says the chickens that are still producing eggs can't keep up with demand.
Well, next week, and then I go back to my neighbor, and he goes, "Joe, you took all the spares I've got. I haven't got anything more to give you." So you're going further and further afield just to get enough eggs to hold your customers.
Willis even says broke eggs are already spoken for. They're used for products like liquid egg whites. Supply problems later on means that even when demand catches up with supply, there may not be extra eggs available to meet future needs. Madeline Riley, Columbia Radio News.
Paul Lutvak, amateur bird photographer.
This one is a long-eared owl. It's very a classic-looking owl. Like if you saw a picture of it, you'd be like, there would be no question. Sometimes, the unwritten code is not to reveal where the owls are, so that they don't get disturbed. But I knew it was in the neighborhood, so I got on the subway and popped out at 72nd, and then I saw a group of photographers, and I had my camera and came over and saw the long-eared owl. The hardest part of all of this is trying to describe to someone where to look. We're in a bunch of tall trees here, and it's very hard to see, I find, with the naked eye. I have a big lens on my camera here. It is a solo pursuit, but when something like this happens, it brings a group of people together.
You're listening to Uptown Radio, Thursdays at 4.
Recent industry rumors have raised concerns about New York City's cannabis market. More specifically, allegations of labs defrauding consumers by printing inflated THC percentages on packages. Reporter Joya Ma asks, how do we know what to trust?
I want to introduce you to a college senior. He's a New Yorker. I'm not going to tell you his name because at times he smoked weed and he's worried about what future employers might think. But when he was using weed, he wasn't worried about where it came from.
For a long time, I didn't even care about that. I would buy my weed from some guy out of his van. I'm sure he wasn't putting it through high quality testing.
But, he says, he started paying attention.
It's easier to not buy from dispensaries because it's cheaper if you're just buying from some smoke shop or some guy. But I definitely started buying from actual dispensaries. They're more trustworthy, I guess. They have more to lose, because they're actually heavily regulated. And so if they were to sort of lie on their lab testing results and all that, they'd actually face real consequences, you would hope.
Lawsuits alleging fraud have been filed against cannabis testing labs in Massachusetts. In California, there have been problems with dangerous pesticide-tainted vapes. Now, there are industry rumors of problems here too, about brands inflating the percentage of THC on packages. Swapnil Patel is the owner of The Flowery, a licensed dispensary on the Upper West Side. It's filled with colorful balloons and giant LED screen with the store's logo. He says he's heard the rumors, but they're false, and products sold by licensed dispensaries like his are safe.
Pick any product.
I have no idea. New York State's Office of Cannabis Management requires cannabis products sold at licensed dispensaries include a label with a QR code and a link that lets consumers see a list of ingredients.
Just pick anything.
Can you show me the vape?
Sure. So here's the QR code that comes on every package.
Ingredient list can include microorganisms, heavy metals, pesticides, or other contaminants. Lamont Jackson is New York's first certified ganja, like sommelier, but for cannabis instead of wine. Jackson was too busy for an audio interview. He said in an email that he wants to see a national standard for testing. Now, cannabis labs in different states follow different rules, so Jackson said they can report different THC percentages in the same product. When asked what standards New York labs follow, the Office of Cannabis Management spokesman didn't provide a direct response, but did recommend keeping up with updates on their website. Joya Ma, Columbia Radio News.
Museums in New York can be a good place to learn about history and reflect on the current political moment. A new exhibit at the Nuo Gallery called New Objectivity features work set in 1920s Germany, categorizing the effects of the Nazi regime. Maud Yesh has a story about the exhibition's opening today on the Upper East Side.
The exhibition features artworks from an art movement in Germany in the 1920s called the New Objectivity. Many of the paintings are portraits of German people, workers, war veterans, and everyday citizens, as well as stark industrial landscapes. The show also includes photography and sculptures. The artists are often focusing on things we don't want to see. Noam Elcott is a professor of art history and archaeology at Columbia University.
Neue Sachlichkeit, or New Objectivity, insisted on representing the world as it was. The seamy underbelly of Weimar Germany, the prostitution, the sexual liberation, the wounded soldiers, the mutilated soldiers, the poverty, everything that a proud right-wing Germany wanted to suppress.
Before this movement, artists were creating abstract works. But by mid-1920s, they switched to create realistic images of people and landscapes. Elcott points to one black and white photograph by August Sander, a straightforward portrait of a man in a three-piece suit and tie, gazing directly at the viewer, a stand-in for a new generation of Germans that made a surprising political shift.
This is a white-collared worker, a new form of employment, advanced more in Germany than any other country, whose social and economic position would degrade over the course of the 1920s. Much to the surprise of political and economic thinkers, he didn't shift left toward the workers and the communists, but instead broke right toward the Nazis.
By capturing everyday life with clarity, this movement became therefore inherently political, even though it was itself politically divided. I wondered if those two camps could relate to the polarization of our time. The exhibition ran through May 26, 2025, if you want to take a look at it. Maud Yesh, Columbia Radio News.
Does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show. Our foreman today was executive producer Una Milliken. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Flora Warshaw. Special thanks to our senior editor Caroline McCarthy and assistant editor Joya Ma. Director Maud Yesh coordinated our studio production with ZJ Young. Thanks to our newscaster Madeline Riley and our day reporters Dana Binfet and Hannah Weaver. Our instructors, Sally Herships, Ben Shapiro, and Priscilla Alabi advised our staff. I'm your host, Hannah Lorenzo. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.